Howdy, Immortalium here, and today I'm going to be reviewing a very important anime film, Momotaro Sacred Sailors. So, if you haven't heard of Momotaro Sacred Sailors, it might interest you to know that this was the first anime film ever. Well, first feature-length anime film ever. It was released in 1945 and was produced by the Japanese Naval Ministry. You heard me right. So this is a propaganda film for World War II, promoting Japanese imperialism. And because of that, this film is very controversial, understandably so. But as the first feature-length anime film, it has a very important place in animation history. So it's well worth discussing this film. So let's get started. What is the story of Momotaro Sacred Sailors? We open up with a group of anthropomorphic animals who are coming back from training to be in the Japanese army. We see many sequences of them discussing with their family, the glory of being in the Japanese army. And eventually we're introduced to a character called Momotaro. Now Momotaro comes from Japanese folklore and is kind of very representative of Japan as a whole. So his presence here in this film is very nationalistic. Eventually we see them fight in the Pacific, over the Pacific Islands. That's what the story is about. Now, with regards to the overall quality of the story, there's a lot of problems here. First of all is the fact that this film feels very disjointed. We can have some sequences with the family early on in the movie, but very little of it is to actually develop the characters themselves and instead promote the ideology of the Japanese at the time. Eventually, when we get to the Pacific, we see various sequences of them establishing bases, of re-educating the local population. For instance, there's a sequence in which they sing about the kana, that's the Japanese writing system, which was something that Japan was doing at the time. They were promoting Japanese culture and Japanese writing systems through force and re-education. And eventually we start seeing stories of how evil the Europeans have been as they've been colonizing Asia. It's very hard to enjoy. I wouldn't say that you should probably go into this film to enjoy it, between how disjointed the story feels and how overwhelmingly nationalistic this film is. And yet there are some odd moments of beauty in this film, which I guess I can discuss a bit more as we move on to the animation. The animation for this film is very reminiscent of Disney at the time. It's in black and white, which I guess is the first thing to bring up. So this is a fully black and white anime film. The animation style of the film is very Disney-esque. Kind of more fluid movement than we'd expect these days, and yet the characters themselves look quite bizarre by anime standards. Artistically, the film isn't bad. There are some moments of very bizarre animation, particularly when we get to the Americans. But I have to say that I love the animation for the sequence where they're berating European colonialism, which has this amazing contrast of black and whites. I think it's a really gorgeous looking sequence. There's also some really incredible animation to do with these kind of dandelions, where this character is just looking at these dandelions, and as he kind of looks at them, he kind of gets reminded of these parachutes. It's pretty incredible, that sequence. So overall, the animation quality of the film isn't bad. It's very different to modern anime, and I don't think anyone can dispute that. But there are moments of animation here that are truly beautiful. With regards to the soundtrack, the soundtrack, as you can expect from a propaganda movie, is very patriotic. And there isn't much to me that stands out about this soundtrack, except for the fact that it's so patriotic. So I have to say that I wasn't particularly impressed with this soundtrack. I guess it serves its purpose. It didn't really clash too heavily with the story that we were seeing, but there wasn't any bit of the soundtrack that really stood out to me, in contrast to those animated sequences. With regards to the voice acting is relatively basic. They serve its purpose. I would assume that a lot of these actors who were involved with this film weren't particularly familiar with voice acting. You just kind of get these kind of very one-note performances, which, again, I guess as a propaganda film, it serves its purpose. And in fact, people have pointed out that when the Americans are voiced in their English, that they're a bit worried that it may in fact be American prisoners of war giving these performances I can't confirm or deny that. I know nothing about those American performers. It is interesting to consider that that may in fact have been a possibility. With regards to the way that this was released, the version that I have here was released by Anime Limited in the UK and Ireland. This film is also available in America by Funimation, but the version I am reviewing here is specifically the UK and Ireland version. And I have to say that this has been released really, really well. It was released in a nice card cover with one of the biggest books I've ever seen for an anime release. If you take a look at this book is over 120 pages long. It was written by Jonathan Clements, a man with a huge amount of insight into anime history, and it's very well written. There's a huge amount of information here, and so if you're looking for more information about this film, this book is absolutely amazing. There's so much information in this book. And as I said, it's one of the biggest I've ever seen for any anime release. Beyond that, we also have a short film available on this called The Spider and the Tulip, which was released a couple of years before Momotaro's Sacred Sailors. It's a short film, but shows kind of the direction that Japanese animation was going at that time, which was very American. Unfortunately, the villain of the work is unfortunately politically incorrect by today's standards, so that is worth taking note of. But I think it's probably fair to say that most of this is politically incorrect by today's standards, and a lot of the value of these films comes from their historical value. Overall, what are my thoughts on Momotaro's Sacred Sailor? It's definitely a very interesting movie with a lot of very interesting moments. There's some moments in this film that really stand out to me, but unfortunately it's very bogged down in nationalistic fervor, and a lot of that caused the film to become disjointed. There's a lot of moments that feel very dragged out. For instance, one of my least favorite sequences in this film is that Kana singing bit, which feels like it goes on forever and ever. But it is a very important film as a historical piece. And I think that it is important that anime fans become familiar with this film. So I definitely recommend the film if you're interested in anime history, in checking out how anime began and the influence it would have later on. In fact, Osamu Tezuka himself claims that he was quite moved by this movie when he saw it in 1945 in the cinema. So this has had an enormous impact on anime history. It's definitely worth watching for that. But regards to its actual quality, I suspect that a lot of people will find this film quite lacking. And for that sake, if you're interested in anime purely as an entertainment medium, I would probably not recommend this film to you. But for those of you interested in anime history, I definitely can. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye-bye.